She was humiliated and kicked off the plane as if she were worth absolutely nothing in front of everyone. But no one there knew that this woman worked directly for a powerful millionaire. What seemed like a mere injustice hid a secret capable of bringing down the entire company. If this beautiful story of resilience and love interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching us from. Continuing, JFK International Airport in New York was buzzing that Thursday morning. Announcements echoed through corridors filled with hurried travelers, suitcases dragged across polished floors, and conversations blending into various languages created the chaotic symphony typical of one of the country's largest terminals. Amidst all that movement, a woman walked in silence, discreet, almost invisible in the middle of the crowd. Sarah Miller was 32 years old, her brown hair tied in a simple ponytail, wearing faded jeans and a basic white blouse. She carried a worn-out backpack on her shoulders, the kind that looks like it has traveled the whole world, and on her feet were scuffed sneakers that had already seen many roads. To the eyes of anyone who crossed her path in that corridor, she was just another ordinary passenger, perhaps even someone who had saved for months to afford that ticket. But Sarah kept secrets that no one there could imagine. She worked directly for Edward Sterling, the man behind Skylink Airways, one of the largest airlines in the United States. She wasn't a secretary, nor an executive with her name on the door of a glass office. Sarah was a specialized auditor, someone Edward trusted to do the work that no official report could reveal. And at that moment, she was on a mission. 3 months ago, anonymous tips reached Edward. Employees were being treated abusively, questionable decisions were being made on specific flights, and passengers were complaining of veiled discrimination. Internal investigations led nowhere, as if there were a curtain of silence protecting those responsible. That was when Edward called her. "Sarah, I need you to go there and see it with your own eyes. Don't trust anyone, don't identify yourself. Just observe and bring me the truth." And there she was, about to board Flight 347 bound for Miami, disguised as an ordinary passenger, carrying only a backpack and the determination to discover what was really happening. When she reached the boarding gate, Sarah noticed the first signs. The Skylink team was there, impeccable in their navy blue uniforms, but there was something in the air. A disguised tension, glances that crossed with hidden meanings, smiles that didn't reach their eyes. She took her place in line, observing everything carefully. That was when Captain Arthur Vance appeared. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with the kind of posture that announced authority even before a word was spoken. Arthur was known for being rigid, demanding, and extremely concerned with the company's image. He stopped near the boarding counter, spoke briefly with the team, and suddenly his eyes landed on Sarah. The look he cast her was not one of curiosity. It was one of judgment. Sarah noticed the exact moment he categorized her. She saw in his eyes the same conclusion so many others had drawn throughout her life. Simple appearance, ordinary clothes, old backpack. Someone who probably didn't belong on that flight, who perhaps had bought a last-minute discounted ticket, who certainly didn't represent the type of passenger Skylink wanted to associate with its brand. He approached. "Excuse me, ma'am." The voice was polite only on the surface, weighted with a coldness that betrayed his true intentions. "Could I see your boarding pass?" Sarah calmly took her phone out of her pocket and presented the electronic ticket. Seat 17B, economy class, payment confirmed. Everything was in order. Arthur looked at the screen, then at her, and then did something Sarah didn't expect. He called over one of the attendants. "Check this. Something is wrong." The employee, a young woman with blonde hair tied in a tight bun, took Sarah's phone and began typing into the system. Seconds dragged on. People in line began to notice. Whispers emerged. Sarah remained silent, observing every movement, every reaction. "Everything is correct, Captain," the attendant said, returning the phone. But Arthur didn't seem satisfied. He looked at Sarah again, this time with even more suspicion. "The flight is full. We had an overbooking issue. We're going to need to reallocate some passengers." Sarah knew exactly what was happening. There was no overbooking. He was trying to remove her from the flight based solely on her appearance. "My ticket is paid for and confirmed," she said, keeping her voice firm but not aggressive. "There is no reason for reallocation." Arthur raised an eyebrow. He wasn't used to being questioned. "Ma'am, the decision about who boards this flight is mine, and I have decided that you will be reallocated to the next one. I need to be in Miami today. I have commitments. Then you should have chosen an airline that could accommodate you properly." The venom in that phrase was felt by everyone around. Passengers looked on, some with pity, others with indifference, but no one said anything. The humiliation was public, calculated, and cruel. Sarah felt her blood boil, but she maintained her composure. Reacting there at that moment would mean exposing her true identity and destroying the entire mission. So, she took a deep breath and did something that surprised everyone. She stepped out of the line. Arthur smiled, satisfied. He turned his back and returned to his duties, certain he had solved the problem. Sarah walked to a more distant corner, took out her phone, and sent a short message to a contact saved only as E. "Situation as expected, proceeding." The reply came in seconds. "Be careful, I trust you." Sarah put her phone away and watched the movement. She waited patiently until the last passenger had entered. That was when one of the flight attendants, a woman in her 50s with tired but kind eyes, passed by her and discreetly dropped a note. Sarah picked up the paper and read it. "Seat 42F. Board through the side door. Someone is expecting you not to show up." She looked up and saw the attendant walking away without looking back. An ally. She had an ally within that crew. Following the instructions, Sarah bypassed the main gate and found a side door used by the maintenance crew. She showed her pass to an employee who seemed to be waiting for her, and without asking questions, he let her through. When she entered the aircraft, the atmosphere was different. The cabin was almost full, passengers settled, luggage stowed. Sarah went straight to the indicated seat at the back of the plane, away from prying eyes. She sat down, placed her backpack under the seat in front of her, and closed her eyes for a moment. The mission had just become much more complicated. Someone knew she would be there. Someone had instructed Arthur to prevent her from boarding, and if someone was trying to block her even before the flight took off, it meant the problem within Skylink was much bigger than Edward imagined. Sarah opened her eyes when she felt a presence beside her. A man was stowing a bag in the overhead compartment. He was tall, tan, with slightly messy dark hair, wearing blue coveralls with the Skylink logo printed on them. An aircraft mechanic, she deduced. When he finished closing the compartment and turned around, their eyes met. For an instant, neither of them looked away. There was something in those dark brown eyes that made Sarah feel a prickle of curiosity. He looked tired, but not the kind of tiredness that comes only from hours of work. It was the exhaustion of someone carrying something heavy inside. "Sorry to bother you," he said, his voice raspy but gentle. "I needed to check some equipment back here." "No problem," Sarah replied. He hesitated, as if he wanted to say something more, but eventually just nodded and moved down the aisle. Sarah watched him walk away, noticing the way he greeted some crew members with discreet nods, but avoided others completely. Interesting. The plane began to prepare for takeoff. The doors were closed. Captain Arthur announced the flight information over the intercom with that authoritative voice Sarah already knew well, and the engines began to roar. She buckled her belt and leaned her head against the window, watching the runway slip away as the aircraft gained speed. When the wheels left the ground and New York began to shrink below, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility tighten in her chest. This wasn't just a trip. It was the beginning of something that could change everything. And as the clouds enveloped the window and the sky opened into an infinite blue, Sarah Miller knew that from then on, every look, every word, and every silence could reveal the truth that so many were trying to hide. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and prepared herself. The silent war had begun. The constant hum of the engines created a sort of noisy silence inside the cabin. Sarah kept her eyes half closed, pretending to rest, but every one of her senses was alert. She watched through the corners of her eyes, listened to fragments of conversations, and mentally recorded every detail that might seem out of place. The flight attendant who had left the note passed through the aisle for the third time in less than 20 minutes. Each time, her gaze slid quickly over Sarah, like someone checking that everything was under control. On the last pass, she dropped a magazine on the empty seat next to Sarah, a seemingly careless but intentional gesture. Sarah picked up the magazine and leafed through it casually. Between the pages, she found another note, handwritten in a hurried script. "Beatrice Thompson, 23 years with the company, I know what's happening. Watch out for the operations manager, he knew you were coming. Sarah memorized the words and discreetly tore the paper into tiny pieces, tucking them into her pants pocket. Beatrice Thompson. A name to remember. Someone who, after 23 years inside Skylink, had enough courage to risk everything and pass information to a stranger. This meant the situation was grave enough to break even the loyalty of someone who had dedicated decades to the company. Sarah set the magazine aside and went back to observing. The flight was proceeding smoothly, but there was a palpable tension among the crew. She noticed how some avoided eye contact with each other, how certain team members whispered in corners, always with their backs to the security cameras. And there was something else, a pattern. Every time a passenger called for assistance, the response varied drastically depending on the person's appearance. A man in a suit, sitting in business class, received 3 different types of drinks without even asking. An elderly woman in simple clothes waited 15 minutes for a glass of water. Sarah recorded it all. Mentally, she was building a map of behaviors, identifying who actively participated in that silent system of discrimination and who just followed orders without questioning. That was when the mechanic she had seen earlier reappeared. He came out of the restricted crew area carrying a toolbox and walked down the aisle with firm but unhurried steps. When he passed Sarah, their eyes met again. This time, he stopped. "Everything okay with the seat?" he asked, his voice low, almost as if he didn't want anyone else to hear. "Everything's fine," Sarah replied, keeping her tone neutral. He nodded but didn't move. He seemed to be measuring something, evaluating. There was a sharp intelligence in those eyes that went beyond the mechanical work he performed. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked suddenly. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "From the plane, no one here is." He let out a half smile but soon turned serious again. "I didn't mean that, it's just you have a different way about you, like you're paying attention to everything." It was a dangerously accurate observation. "I'm just tired," Sarah deflected, crossing her arms. "Long week." He studied her face for another moment, then nodded slowly. "I understand, sorry to bother you." He started to walk away, but Sarah felt an impulse she couldn't ignore. "Wait." He stopped and turned around. "Have you worked here a long time?" 6 years, he replied, taking a few steps back. "Why?" "Just curious, do you like what you do?" The question seemed simple, but Sarah saw the immediate change in his expression. Something crossed his face, too fast to be defined, but deep enough to be felt. Frustration, disappointment, weariness. "I used to like it more," he said, his voice carrying a weight that wasn't there seconds before. "Things changed." "Changed how?" He looked around, checking if anyone was paying attention, and then leaned slightly closer. "It's not about flying safely or taking care of people anymore. Now it's about appearance, numbers, and pleasing those with money. The rest doesn't matter." There was a raw honesty in those words. Sarah realized he wasn't just venting. He was testing her, trying to understand if she was someone he could trust. "And do you agree with that?" Sarah asked, keeping her gaze steady on his. "No. But disagreeing doesn't change anything, it just puts a target on your back for those in charge. Maybe changing things requires more than disagreeing in silence." He stared at her with renewed intensity, as if he were seeing something he hadn't noticed before. "You talk like someone who knows the system from the inside." Sarah held his gaze but didn't answer. The silence between them stretched, loaded with unasked questions and ungiven answers. That was when Captain Arthur's voice cut through the moment over the intercom. "Attention, crew. Security check in the rear cabin. Standard procedure." The mechanic frowned. "Standard procedure," he muttered, more to himself. "That never happens during the flight." He shot one last look at Sarah, now with clear concern written on his face, and hurried toward the front of the aircraft. Sarah felt her heart race. Security check in the rear cabin, exactly where she was sitting. It was no coincidence. Seconds later, 2 crew members she hadn't seen before appeared. One of them, a tall man with a stern face, began checking the overhead compartments. The other, a woman with a hard expression, stopped beside Sarah. "Ma'am, we're going to need to check your carry-on luggage." "For what reason?" Sarah asked, maintaining her calm. "Security procedure. All passengers in this section will be checked." Sarah looked around. There were 8 passengers in that section. No one else was being approached. "Of course," she said, taking the backpack from under the seat and handing it over. The woman unzipped it and began rummaging through the contents. Simple clothes, a book, a water bottle, a phone charger. Nothing suspicious. Nothing that could justify that approach. But Sarah knew exactly what they were looking for. They wanted to know who she was. They wanted to find something that identified her. They wanted a reason to remove her from the flight, even after it was already in the air. The woman closed the backpack with a sharp movement and handed it back. "Everything is in order," she said, but her tone made it clear she wasn't satisfied. As the two moved away, Sarah noticed Beatrice, the flight attendant, watching everything from a distance. Her eyes met Sarah's for a fraction of a second, and in that brief moment, there was a mutual understanding. They were hunting her. 20 minutes later, Beatrice passed by again, this time pushing the beverage cart. When she reached Sarah, she stopped. "Would you like something to drink?" "Water, please." Beatrice served the water, and as she handed over the cup, dropped a spoon on the floor near Sarah's feet. Both leaned down at the same time to pick it up, and it was in that moment, hidden by the height of the seat, that Beatrice whispered quickly, "Gather your things. When we land, be the last to get off. Someone will be waiting for you at the gate, but not to help you. There is a maintenance exit for staff on the left side of the terminal. Look for a door with a maintenance sign. Someone will meet you there." Before Sarah could respond, Beatrice was already standing again, putting the spoon back in the cart and moving down the aisle as if nothing had happened. Sarah took a sip of water, feeling the coldness of the liquid go down her throat, but she was unable to calm the fire beginning to burn inside. The situation was escalating faster than she expected. She looked out the window again. Below, the country stretched out in a mosaic of green, brown, and blue, so vast, so beautiful, so oblivious to what was happening thousands of feet above. The rest of the flight passed in a silent tension. Sarah remained motionless, observing, memorizing faces, behaviors, patterns. She saw how certain crew members exchanged looks loaded with meaning, how some passengers were treated with deference while others were ignored, how that entire system functioned in a cruel hierarchy based on appearances. When the captain announced the approach for landing in Miami, Sarah felt the aircraft begin to descend. The roar of the engines changed pitch, the pressure inside the cabin adjusted, and the seatbelt tightened against her body. That was when the mechanic reappeared one last time. He walked down the aisle, apparently checking if everything was secure for landing, but when he reached Sarah, he stopped for a second and dropped something on the seat next to her. A business card. Before she could say anything, he had already moved on. Sarah picked up the card discreetly. On the back it was handwritten, "Nathan Brooks, if you need help, find me, Hangar 7. She tucked the card in her pocket and closed her eyes as the aircraft touched the ground with a slight jolt. The wheels screeched on the hot Miami asphalt, the brakes engaged, and the whole structure vibrated with the deceleration. The plane taxied to its final position and stopped. Sarah waited. She saw the passengers stand up in a hurry, grab their bags, and form anxious lines in the aisles. She remained seated, as Beatrice had instructed. When the last passenger left and only the crew remained, Sarah finally stood up. She grabbed her backpack, adjusted the straps on her shoulders, and walked toward the exit. Beatrice was there near the door, straightening some papers. As Sarah passed, she whispered without looking, "Good luck." Sarah walked down the boarding stairs and stepped onto Miami soil. The hot, humid air immediately enveloped her body. She walked across the tarmac toward the terminal, but her eyes were already searching, and she found him. A man in a dark suit was standing near the gate, looking directly at her. When their eyes met, he began walking in her direction. Sarah diverted her course, pretending to look for something in her backpack, and quickened her pace toward the left side of the terminal, as Beatrice had indicated. She saw the door with the maintenance sign and, without hesitating, pushed it open. On the other side was an empty corridor lit by flickering fluorescent lights. And there, leaning against the wall waiting, was Nathan Brooks. Their eyes met, and in that moment something changed between them. It was no longer just suspicion or curiosity. It was the beginning of an alliance that neither of them had planned, but both knew would be necessary to survive what was to come. The maintenance corridor smelled of engine oil and cleaning products. The white walls were stained by time and constant use, and the hum of the fluorescent lights created an annoying soundtrack. Sarah stopped a few feet from Nathan, still clutching the straps of her backpack, assessing the situation. He moved away from the wall and took a step toward her, but kept a respectful distance. "How did you know I'd come this way?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence. "Beatrice told me. She trusts me and I trust her. That's enough for now." "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Nathan crossed his arms, his gaze serious. "Because I saw what they did to you back at the boarding gate in New York, and because over the last few months, I've seen too many things that I can't pretend don't exist anymore." Sarah studied his face. There was sincerity there, but also a weight. He wasn't doing this lightly. He was risking something. "What have you seen?" she asked, taking a step forward. Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "People being treated like trash just because they don't have the right clothes or don't talk the way the company considers proper. Employees being pressured to follow absurd service standards that in practice mean veiled discrimination. And when someone complains, they're either fired or they simply disappear from the scene." "Disappear how?" "Sudden transfers, job changes without explanation, contracts terminated without cause, always with an official excuse that never makes sense." Sarah felt a chill down her spine. It was exactly the kind of pattern Edward had mentioned, a systematic cleaning of any dissenting voice. "And why are you still here?" she challenged. Nathan gave a bitter smile. "Because I'm good at what I do and because I learned to keep quiet, at least until now." "Until now," Sarah repeated. "What changed?" He stared at her with intensity. "You. I don't know who you are, but I'm sure you're not an ordinary passenger. No one stays that calm while being publicly humiliated. No one observes everything around them with that much attention. You're here for a reason." Sarah kept her expression neutral, but internally she had to admit that Nathan was more observant than he appeared. "And if I am," she replied, neither confirming nor denying, "then I want to help. Because if there's someone trying to fix this mess, I want to be a part of it." There was a moment of silence between them, heavy and loaded with meaning. Sarah knew she needed allies, but trusting someone she had just met went against all her professional survival instincts. But there was something about Nathan, a raw honesty, a genuine weariness from someone who carried the weight of seeing wrong things and not being able to do anything about it. She knew that feeling well. "All right," Sarah said finally, "but I need you to understand one thing. What I'm doing here is dangerous. If they find out you're helping me, your career is over. Maybe worse." "I already understood that when I decided to wait for you here." Sarah nodded slowly. "Then let's begin. I need to get out of this airport without being seen. That man in the suit who was waiting for me won't give up so easily." Nathan looked at his watch. "I know an exit the maintenance crew uses to access the parking lot. We can go through there. My car is 2 blocks away. I can take you wherever you need to go." "No, you've already risked too much. Take me to the exit and then go back to your duties. You can't raise suspicions." "And you? Where will you go?" "I have a contact here in Miami. Someone who can give me access to the information I need." Nathan hesitated, as if he wanted to argue, but eventually agreed. "All right, but give me your number. If I find out anything, I want to be able to warn you." Sarah evaluated for a second, then took out her phone and typed in a number. "It's a temporary number. Only use it in an emergency." He saved the contact and put the device away. "Let's go." They followed the corridor, Nathan in front, guiding Sarah through a labyrinth of internal passages she would never have discovered on her own. They passed through equipment rooms, cleaning closets, and restricted areas where mechanics worked on aircraft parts. No one questioned their presence. Nathan greeted some with nods but didn't stop to talk. Finally, they reached a metal door that opened into a side parking lot. Nathan opened it slowly and checked if the coast was clear. "Ready. From here you come out on the street parallel to the terminal. Easy to catch a cab without being seen." Sarah stepped through the door, but before leaving completely, she turned to him. "Thank you, Nathan." He gave a half smile. "You're welcome. And Sarah?" She stopped, surprised he knew her name. He pointed to the backpack. "Dirt's written on the identification tag." She looked and saw the tag she had forgotten to remove. She gave a small smile, the first genuine one since she had arrived at the airport. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too." Sarah stepped out into the scorching Miami heat and walked quickly to the street. She caught a taxi in less than 5 minutes and gave the address of a discreet hotel in the South Beach area. During the ride, she looked out the window, watching the city pass by. Miami with its bridges, its water, its Art Deco architecture mixed with the modern, its pulsating life. So different from New York, but with its own rhythms and secrets. When she arrived at the hotel, she checked in under a false name and paid in cash. She went up to her room, locked the door, and finally allowed the tension to escape her shoulders. She threw her backpack on the bed and went to the window, looking at the ocean stretching out in the distance. She took her phone and called Edward. He answered on the second ring. "Sarah, did you arrive safely?" "I did, but it wasn't easy. They tried to stop me from boarding in New York." There was a pause on the other end. "They already know you're there." "Someone knows. I don't know who, but the information leaked. Captain Arthur Vance humiliated me publicly and tried to remove me from the flight. I only managed to board because a flight attendant helped me." "Beatrice Thompson," Edward said, recognizing the name. "She's one of the few I still trust. She risked a lot for me. And there's someone else, a mechanic named Nathan Brooks. He helped me get out of the airport without being seen." "Nathan?" Edward repeated the name, thoughtful. "I know his work. Good professional, but he keeps his distance from internal politics. Interesting that he got involved." "He's seen a lot, Edward, and he's tired of staying quiet. That makes him a valuable ally, or a risk if he doesn't know what he's doing. I'll keep an eye on him. Sarah, I need you to be very careful. If information leaked that you were going there, it means there is someone very close to me passing information, someone who knows about the internal operations." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "Do you have any idea who?" "I have suspicions, but I can't confirm them yet. That's why I need you to continue. Find out who is behind this. And Sarah, don't trust anyone completely, not even those who seem to be on your side." Edward's words echoed in her mind after they hung up. Don't trust anyone completely. She looked at her phone, at Nathan's number saved there. Was he really an ally or just another piece in the game someone was playing? She decided only time would tell. That night, Sarah hardly slept. She stayed awake, mentally reviewing everything she had observed, connecting dots, building hypotheses. When the sun began to rise, painting the Miami sky in shades of orange and pink, she already had a plan. She needed to access the files at the Miami base, flight documents, complaint logs, security camera footage, everything that could prove the behavioral pattern she had been observing. But for that, she would need internal help. She took her phone and sent a message to Nathan. "I need to get into the base tonight. Can you help me?" The reply came 10 minutes later. "Hangar 7, 10 p.m. side door. I'll leave it unlocked." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She was about to take a much bigger step in that investigation. The day passed slowly. She stayed in her room reviewing her notes, studying maps of the Miami airbase, preparing herself mentally for what was to come. When the clock struck 9 p.m., she dressed in black pants, a dark blouse, and tied her hair in a tight bun. She took a taxi to the vicinity of the base and walked the rest of the way. Hangar 7 was in a more secluded area, used mainly for heavy maintenance. When she arrived, the side door was ajar, exactly as Nathan had promised. She entered slowly, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The hangar was huge, with a partially dismantled aircraft in the center and tools scattered everywhere. It smelled of metal and grease. "Sarah!" She turned and saw Nathan stepping out of the shadows. He was wearing the same work coveralls, but there was something different in his face. Tension. Urgency. "I got access to the files you're going to need," he said, getting straight to the point. "But you need to be fast. The night shift changes in 40 minutes. "Where are they?" "Administration office, second floor, but there's a problem." "What?" "The cameras. I can't deactivate them without raising suspicion. You're going to show up on the recordings." Sarah thought fast. "How many cameras?" "3. One in the corridor, one on the stairs, one at the office entrance." "Angles?" Nathan pulled a paper from his pocket with a quick sketch. "I drew them here." Sarah studied the drawing. There were blind spots. Not many, but enough if she was fast and precise. "I can do it," she said. "Take me there." They went up a side staircase, Nathan in front, constantly checking if the coast was clear. When they reached the second floor, he pointed down the corridor. "Third door on the left. It's an electronic lock, but I got a temporary password." He handed her a slip of paper with numbers. You have 15 minutes before the system logs an unauthorized access. Sarah took the paper and looked into his eyes. Why are you doing this? Nathan held her gaze, and in that moment something passed between them. It was no longer just about justice or fixing mistakes. There was a connection forming, something neither of them had planned, but that was becoming impossible to ignore. Because it's the right thing to do, he said, his voice low. And because I believe in you. Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. It had been a long time since someone had said they believed in her. Thank you, was all she could manage to say. She followed the corridor, using the blind spots she had memorized, and reached the door. She typed in the password. The green light lit up. She entered. The room was small, with metal filing cabinets lined against the wall and an old computer on a desk. Sarah went straight to the files, looking for the complaint folders from the last 6 months. She found them. She began photographing every document with her phone. Passenger complaints about discriminatory treatment, employee reports of workplace harassment, internal reports that were filed away without investigation. Everything was there, recorded, ignored, hidden. That was when she found something that made her blood run cold. A document signed by Charles Richmond, Skylink's operations manager in Miami. In it, there were clear instructions for captains and crews to prioritize first-class passengers in overbooking situations, using appearance criteria to decide who would be reallocated. Institutionalized discrimination. In writing, signed. Sarah photographed everything, her heart beating fast. It was exactly the kind of proof Edward needed. That was when she heard footsteps in the corridor. She stopped immediately, turned off her phone's flash and stood still. The office lights were off, but the door had a glass window. Anyone passing by could see movement. The footsteps approached, and then they stopped exactly in front of the door. Sarah held her breath, her body completely motionless in the darkness of the room. The footsteps had stopped on the other side of the door, and she could see a shadow through the frosted glass. Someone was there, standing, perhaps listening, perhaps just checking. The seconds dragged on like hours. Then Nathan's voice cut through the silence of the corridor. "Good evening, Tony. Still around?" A raspy voice replied. "Good evening, Nathan. Forgot some papers. You know how it is." "I do indeed. I'm also finishing some adjustments in the hangar. Will you be long?" No, just grab them and I'm off." Sarah heard the footsteps move away in the opposite direction. She waited another 30 seconds, then moved quickly. She finished photographing the last documents, put everything back exactly as it was, and left the room, locking the door behind her. Nathan was waiting at the end of the corridor, leaning against the wall with a tense expression. When he saw her, his shoulders visibly relaxed. "Did you get it?" he whispered. "I got it. Let's get out of here." They went down the side stairs, again using the camera blind spots. When they got back to the hangar, Sarah finally allowed the air to leave her lungs in a long sigh. "That was too risky," Nathan said, running a hand through his hair in a nervous gesture. "If Tony had entered that room—" "But he didn't, thanks to you." Nathan shook his head. "I don't know if I have the nerves for this. My job is fixing planes, not espionage." Sarah gave a small smile. "Welcome to my world." He looked at her with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "Do you do this often?" "More than I'd like." Nathan pointed to a door at the back of the hangar. "Come on. There's a place where we can talk with more privacy." They followed to a small break room used by the mechanics. It had only an old sofa, a table with a coffee maker and some lockers. Nathan turned on a dim light and closed the door. "Show me what you found," he asked. Sarah took out her phone and began scrolling through the photos. Nathan leaned in closer to see better, and suddenly she was very aware of his proximity. She could feel the heat of his body next to hers, the slight scent of soap mixed with engine grease. She focused on the photos. "Look at this," she said, zooming in on the document signed by Charles Richmond. "Explicit instructions to discriminate against passengers based on appearance, signed by the operations manager." Nathan read in silence, his expression becoming increasingly grim. "I knew something like this existed, but I'd never seen it in writing. This is revolting." "It's criminal," Sarah corrected. "And it's just the tip of the iceberg. Look here." She swiped to other photos. "Complaints filed away without investigation. Employees fired for reporting abuses. There's a systematic pattern." Nathan stepped back a bit, rubbing his face with his hands. How long has this been going on? From the documents I saw, at least 2 years. But it's probably older. They only started recording when someone threatened to sue. 2 years, Nathan repeated, his voice heavy with frustration. 2 years of people being humiliated, and I was here, seeing it all and doing nothing. You didn't know the extent of it. No one did. But I suspected. I saw the signs, and I chose to keep quiet because it was easier, because I didn't want trouble. Sarah touched his arm, making him look at her. But you're not quiet anymore. You're here now, risking everything to help change this. That counts. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. An understanding, a connection that went beyond words. Nathan covered her hand with his, and the touch was soft, almost hesitant. Why do you do this, Sarah? He asked, his voice low. Why risk so much? Sarah took a deep breath. She wasn't used to sharing her story, but something about Nathan made her want to trust him. Because I know what it's like to be judged by appearance. I know what it's like to be treated as if you don't deserve respect, just because you don't fit the pattern someone decided was right. She looked down at the simple clothes she wore. I grew up poor, very poor. My mother worked 3 jobs to give me an education. I went to public school, wore patched uniforms, carried borrowed books. And I learned early on that the world judges you before you even open your mouth. Nathan squeezed her hand, encouraging her to continue. When I got my first job at a big company, I thought things would be different, but they weren't. I was good at what I did, but there was always someone reminding me that I didn't belong there. Until one day, I met Edward Sterling. He was the first person who saw me for what I was capable of doing, not for the clothes I wore. And he hired you? He gave me a chance, and I proved I deserved it. Now I work for him doing exactly this, finding out where people are being treated unfairly within his companies, because he believes no one should go through what I went through. Nathan held her face gently, making her look at him. You are incredible, do you know that? Sarah felt her heart race. I'm just someone doing what needs to be done. No, you are much more than that. The tension between them was palpable now, electric. Nathan leaned in slightly, his eyes moving from her eyes to her lips. Sarah knew she should pull back, keep the professional distance, focus on the mission. But she couldn't. When their lips touched, it was soft at first, almost tentative. But then the intensity grew, and Sarah found herself responding with an urgency she didn't know she had inside her. Nathan's hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer, and she intertwined her fingers in his hair. They stayed there, lost in each other, until common sense finally prevailed and Sarah pulled away, breathless. That was, she began. A mistake, Nathan finished, but there was no regret in his voice. No, but complicated. I know, but I don't regret it. Sarah leaned her forehead against his, closing her eyes. Neither do I, but we need to focus. There's a lot at stake. I know. He gave one last soft kiss to her forehead and stepped back. So what's the next step? Sarah took a deep breath, composing herself. I need to send these photos to Edward, but I also need to find out more. Charles Richmond is an important piece, but I don't believe he's the only one. There has to be more people involved. There are. Charles reports directly to regional management. If he's doing this openly, it's because he has protection from above. Who is the regional director? Fiona Caldwell. She took the position 3 years ago, transferred from Chicago. Sarah made a mental note. I need to investigate her too. Is there any way to access the financial records of the operation here in Miami? Nathan thought for a moment. Not directly, but I know someone who works in finance, Rachel. She once mentioned to me that she'd seen strange things in the reports. Is she trustworthy? I think so, but I can't guarantee it. Can you arrange a meeting? I'll try, but it'll have to be discreet. Sarah nodded. It always is. Nathan took his phone and sent a message. The reply came a few minutes later. She can meet you tomorrow night at a cafe downtown, 8 p.m. Perfect, I'll be there. I'm going with you. Sarah hesitated. Nathan, the more you get involved, the greater the risk. I'm already involved, and I'm not letting you do this alone. She wanted to argue, but the truth was that having Nathan by her side made her feel less alone, and at that moment, that was something she didn't know she needed so much. All right, she yielded, but be careful. If something goes wrong, you leave and let me handle it. Deal? Deal. Sarah looked at the clock. It was past midnight. I need to get back to the hotel. Can you take me? Sure. They left the hangar through the side door, taking care not to be seen. Nathan's car, an old but well-kept blue sedan, was parked in the back. They got in, and he drove in silence through the empty streets of Miami. When they reached the hotel, Nathan parked a few feet from the entrance. "Sarah," he said before she got out, "about what happened back there. I know it was intense, but we can't let it interfere with what we're doing." "It won't interfere, I promise, but I'm also not going to pretend it didn't mean anything." Sarah held his hand for a moment. "It meant something to me too, but right now we need to focus." "Understood." She got out of the car and entered the hotel, feeling his gaze following every step. When she reached her room, she locked the door and leaned against it for a moment, letting the emotions finally come to the surface. It was dangerous to get attached to someone during a mission. She knew that, but Nathan had broken through her defenses in a way she wasn't prepared for. She shook her head, pushing the thoughts away, and grabbed her phone. She needed to send the photos to Edward. But when she opened the messaging app, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A message from an unknown number. "I know who you are. I know what you're doing. If you continue, you'll regret it." Sarah stared at the screen, her heart beating fast. Someone knew, someone was watching, and that someone was closer than she imagined. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat on the bed, phone in hand, staring fixedly at the threatening message. Every sound in the hotel corridor made her jump. Every shadow at the window seemed to carry a hidden threat. At dawn, she called Edward. "Sarah, it's 5 in the morning. Did something happen?" "I received a threat. Someone knows who I am and what I'm doing here." Silence on the other end. Then Edward's voice came loaded with concern. "Where did the message come from?" "Unknown number, unregistered." "Are you safe?" "For now. But Edward, this confirms what you suspected. There is someone very close to you leaking information." "I know, and I think I know who it is." Sarah sat up straight. "Who?" "Charles Richmond. He has access to almost everything that happens in operations, and over the last few months I noticed confidential information was reaching the wrong places at the wrong time." "Charles Richmond," Sarah repeated, the name fitting perfectly into the puzzle. "He signed the document I found. The discrimination instructions. Then he's not just complicit, he's one of the architects of all this." "Edward, I need more proof, financial proof. If he's leaking information, he's probably embezzling resources too." "I agree. But Sarah, if he knows who you are, you're in real danger. Maybe it's time to back off and let me handle this another way." "No, I'm too close. Tonight I'm meeting with someone from finance. She might have information on suspicious movements." "You're not going alone." "I'm going with Nathan. He's trustworthy, Edward, I'm sure of it." There was a pause. "Are you getting emotionally involved with him?" Sarah hesitated but decided to be honest. "Yes, Sarah. I know what you're going to say, and you're right, but I can't change how I feel, and he's helped me more than anyone could." Edward sighed. "Just be careful with the mission and with your heart. Both can be broken easily." "I know." After hanging up, Sarah took a hot shower, trying to ease the tension she carried in her shoulders. She dressed in clean clothes and went down for breakfast. She needed to maintain the appearance of normalcy, even if her world was collapsing inside. The day dragged on. She stayed in her room reviewing the photos she had taken, making notes, building a timeline of events. At 6 p.m., she sent a message to Nathan. "Still on for tonight?" The reply came immediately. "Of course, I'll pick you up at 7:30. Be ready." Sarah was waiting in front of the hotel when Nathan arrived. He parked, and she quickly got into the car. "Hey," he said, and there was something in his voice that made Sarah look at him closely. "What is it?" "This morning when I got to the hangar, my locker had been tossed. Nothing was taken, but someone was looking for something." Sarah felt a shiver. "They know you're helping me." "Probably, but I'm not backing down now." "Nathan, this is getting too dangerous. Maybe you should—" "No." He held her hand firmly. "We already talked about this. I'm going to the end with you." Sarah squeezed his hand back, feeling a mixture of gratitude and fear. She didn't want anything to happen to him because of her. They drove in silence to downtown Miami. The cafe was on a busy street, filled with students and young professionals. It was the kind of place where it was easy to go unnoticed in the crowd. Rachel was already there, sitting at a table in the back. She was a woman in her 40s, with short, red-dyed hair and thick-rimmed glasses. She looked nervously around as Sarah and Nathan approached. "Rachel, this is Sarah." "Sarah, Rachel," Nathan made the introductions. They sat down and Sarah went straight to the point. "Nathan said you saw strange things in the financial reports." Rachel looked around again before answering. "I shouldn't be talking about this. I signed confidentiality agreements." "I understand. But if there's something wrong happening, something that's hurting the company and the people, don't you think it deserves to be exposed?" Rachel bit her lip, clearly torn. "It's just, if they find out it was me who talked—" "They won't find out," Sarah guaranteed. "I have other ways of confirming any information you pass me. Your name won't be mentioned." Rachel took a deep breath and then began to speak. "Over the last 6 months, I started noticing recurring payments to companies I had never seen before. Consulting firms, technical services, maintenance, high amounts, always approved quickly, without the normal audit process." "Do you have the names of these companies?" Rachel took out her phone and showed a list. "I took a photo of the screen when no one was looking. I know it was risky, but something inside me said I needed to save this." Sarah looked at the list. 5 different companies. "Were you able to track these companies?" "I tried. Most have no online presence beyond a basic registration. None have a real physical address. They're shell companies." "And who approves these payments?" "Charles Richmond and Fiona Caldwell. Always the 2 of them together." Sarah exchanged a look with Nathan. It was exactly what they suspected. "There's more," Rachel continued, her voice even lower. "Last week I overheard a conversation between Charles and someone on the phone. He was nervous, talking about someone who was asking too many questions. He said they needed to speed things up before it was too late." "Did he mention names?" "No, but he said something about an auditor, and about making sure she didn't reach her destination." Sarah felt her blood run cold. That confirmed everything. Charles had known about her from the beginning. The attempt to stop her from boarding hadn't been prejudice. It had been a calculated plan. "Rachel, you're in danger if they know you're passing this information," Sarah said seriously. "You need to be very careful." "I know, but I can't stay silent anymore. I've worked here for 15 years, always proud of the company. Seeing what it's become, it breaks my heart." Sarah touched her hand. "You're doing the right thing, and we're going to make sure this isn't in vain." They left the cafe 20 minutes later, Sarah carrying the information like bombs ready to explode. In the car, she turned to Nathan. "We need to confront Charles now." "What, Sarah? No, that's crazy." "It's not crazy. It's strategy. He already knows I'm here. He already knows I'm investigating. If I show up before him with proof, I can force him to make a mistake, to expose himself completely. Or he could hurt you. That's why you'll be with me. And we'll do it in a public place, in his office during business hours. He won't risk doing anything in front of witnesses." Nathan gripped the steering wheel, clearly unconvinced. "And if he just denies everything? Then we go to the next level. But I need to see his face when I present the evidence. I need to see if there's anyone else involved that we haven't identified yet." Nathan looked at her for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "All right, but at the first sign of danger we leave. Agreed?" "Agreed." The next morning, Sarah dressed differently. Black dress slacks, an impeccable white blouse, her hair tied in an elegant bun. When Nathan saw her waiting in front of the hotel, his eyes widened. "You look different. Today I'm not an ordinary passenger. Today I'm Sarah Miller, Skylink auditor, representing Edward Sterling directly. You're going to reveal yourself?" "I'm going to reveal enough to make him sweat." They arrived at the Skylink administrative building in Miami at 9 a.m. Sarah entered with the confidence of someone who belonged there, Nathan at her side, and went straight to the reception. "I need to speak with Charles Richmond. It's urgent." The receptionist looked at her, clearly surprised by the authority in her voice. "Do you have an appointment?" "I don't need one. Tell him Sarah Miller is here representing Edward Sterling." The mention of the company owner's name made the receptionist pick up the phone immediately. She spoke quietly, heard the reply, and then hung up. "He'll see you in 5 minutes. 3rd floor, room 305. Sarah and Nathan went up in the elevator, the silence between them heavy with tension. When they reached the room, the door was open. Charles Richmond was sitting behind a huge desk, his face a mask of control. But Sarah saw the flash of recognition in his eyes when she entered. "Ms. Miller," he said, his voice polite but cold. How can I help you? Sarah placed her backpack on the desk and took out a folder with printed copies of all the documents she had photographed. You can start by explaining this, she said, opening the folder and revealing the document with his signature authorizing passenger discrimination. Charles's face lost some color, but he composed himself quickly. I don't know what you're talking about. No, that's your signature, isn't it? Authorizing captains to use appearance as a criterion for passenger reallocation. You don't have authorization to access internal documents. I have all the authorization. Edward Sterling sent me here for exactly this, to find out why his company is becoming a place where people are treated like trash. Charles stood up, trying to impose authority through his height. You're making a grave mistake, young lady. I suggest you leave now before I call security. Call them, and explain to them why the operations manager is trying to kick out an auditor sent by the company owner. That was when the door opened, and another person entered. Fiona Caldwell, regional director, tall with perfectly styled black hair and an impeccable suit. What's going on here? She asked, her gaze moving from Charles to Sarah. Fiona, this woman is exposing a scheme of corruption, discrimination, and embezzlement, Sarah interrupted, turning to Fiona. And you, Director Caldwell, are at the center of it. Fiona narrowed her eyes. Careful with your accusations. Sarah opened more pages of the folder. Shell companies, payments approved without audits, contracts with non-existent suppliers, all approved by the two of you, want to keep denying it. The silence that followed was deafening. It was Charles who broke first. You have no idea what you're messing with. There are people much more powerful involved in this than you imagine. Then tell me who they are. I'm not saying anything, but I can guarantee one thing, you're not leaving here with those proofs. Nathan took a step forward, placing himself between Sarah and Charles. She is, and if you try to stop her, you'll have to go through me first. The tension in the air was palpable. Fiona looked at her phone, typing something quickly. Sarah noticed the movement. Calling for backup, it won't help. Edward Sterling has already received copies of everything. Even if you destroy these proofs here, you can't destroy the truth. Charles and Fiona exchanged looks, and Sarah saw defeat beginning to settle in. It's over, she said simply. For both of you, it's over. The room was plunged into a heavy silence. Charles and Fiona remained motionless, but Sarah could see their minds working frantically, looking for an exit, a justification, anything that could save them. That was when Sarah's phone rang. Excuse me, she said, answering. Hello? Sarah, it's me. Edward's voice sounded clear and firm. I'm in the parking lot, coming up now. Sarah felt an immense relief flood her chest. Understood. She hung up and looked at Charles and Fiona. Edward Sterling is arriving. I suggest you prepare your explanations. Charles's face went completely pale. Fiona, however, tried to maintain her composure. This is absurd. You don't have... The door opened. Edward Sterling entered the room with the presence of someone who commanded empires. Tall, perfectly combed grey hair, impeccable suit. But what really impressed was the intensity in his eyes. He looked at everyone in the room, taking in the scene, and then his eyes landed on Sarah. Good work, he said simply. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of the mission finally beginning to lift. Edward turned to Charles and Fiona. The two of you have 30 seconds to explain to me what you thought you were doing with my company. Fiona tried to speak. Mr. Sterling, this auditor invaded... Sarah Miller didn't invade anything. She was doing exactly what I asked her to do. Finding out why serious reports were being ignored, why loyal employees were being fired without cause, and why our reputation was being destroyed. You stole from me. You embezzled resources, diverted funds to shell companies, and worst of all, you tarnished Skylink's name by turning it into a place where people are judged by appearance and not by character. Charles finally spoke, his voice trembling. It wasn't just us, there were other people involved, important people. Who? Captain Arthur Vance. He was the one who suggested the prioritization system, said first-class passengers generated more revenue and we should focus on them. Edward looked at Sarah. Arthur is the one who humiliated you at boarding? Yes. Edward's jaw tightened. Anyone else? Fiona realized there was no way out. There's a group of executives in New York. They approached us 2 years ago with a proposal. If we implemented certain policies here in Miami and achieved above-average profits, we'd receive significant bonuses, All off the books. "Names," Edward demanded. Fiona looked down, defeated, and began listing names. Sarah recorded everything on her phone. There were 6 people in total, all in middle and upper management positions. One of them, to Sarah's surprise, was someone Edward had mentioned as trustworthy. "Mark Travis," Edward repeated, the shock evident on his face. "My human resources manager. He was the one who gave us the information that Sarah was coming," Charles admitted. "Said we needed to stop her at all costs." Edward closed his eyes for a moment, processing the betrayal. When he opened them again, there was only determination. "You're fired. Immediately. I'm going to call my lawyers and ensure you answer criminally for everything you've done, and everyone involved will go down with you." "Mr. Sterling, please," Fiona tried. "I have a family, bills to pay." "You should have thought about that before destroying the lives of other people who also had families and bills to pay." Edward turned to Sarah. "Do you have everything documented?" "Everything. Photos, recordings, testimony, enough to build a solid case." "Excellent. Nathan," Edward looked at the mechanic who had remained silent throughout the scene, "thank you for protecting Sarah and for having the courage to do what was right." Nathan nodded, clearly impressed to be standing before the company owner. Edward took his phone and made a call. "Security? I need a team on the 3rd floor, room 305. 2 people need to be escorted out of the building." He hung up and looked at Charles and Fiona. "Wait here. Security is coming." In the minutes that followed, the room remained in absolute silence. When security arrived, Charles and Fiona were removed, their faces pale and defeated. As soon as the door closed, Edward turned to Sarah. "Are you okay? You weren't hurt?" "I'm fine, just tired." "I imagine. You did an exceptional job, as always." He looked at Nathan. "And you, Nathan Brooks, demonstrated a rare integrity these days. I'd like to offer you a different position in the company. Quality and Ethics Supervisor. Someone who will work directly with me to ensure nothing like this ever happens again." Nathan looked at Sarah, then at Edward, clearly surprised. It would be an honor, Mr. Sterling." "Great. Sarah will give you the details." Edward left the room to make more calls, leaving Sarah and Nathan alone. "You deserve this," Sarah said, smiling. "You really do." Nathan took her hand. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't come, if you hadn't had the courage to face all this. We faced it together." He pulled her into a tight hug, and Sarah allowed herself for the first time in days to completely relax. In the following days, Skylink went through an unprecedented transformation. Arthur Vance was fired, as were all the executives involved in the scheme, including Mark Travis. Criminal investigations were opened, and the media began covering the case as an example of how corporate corruption could be dismantled when there was real will for change. Beatrice Thompson was promoted to Service Supervisor, with the responsibility of training new teams with a focus on respect and dignity. Rachel received public recognition for her courage and took on an internal audit role. Edward implemented rigorous new policies, mandatory training on discrimination, anonymous reporting channels, regular surprise audits, and most importantly, a deep cultural change that put people before profits. Sarah stayed in Miami for 2 more weeks, helping with the transition and ensuring the changes were implemented correctly. And during that time, her relationship with Nathan flourished in a way neither had imagined possible. One night, sitting on South Beach watching the waves break on the sand, Nathan asked, "What's going to happen when you go back to New York?" Sarah intertwined her fingers with his. "I don't know. I never thought much about a personal future. I was always focused on work. And now? Now I want to think. I want to have something beyond work." Nathan smiled. "Can I be part of that something?" Sarah turned to him, looking into the eyes that had become so familiar, so important. "You already are." They kissed there under the Miami stars, with the sound of the ocean as their soundtrack. 3 months later, Sarah was back in New York, but no longer as the lonely auditor who lived only for the next case. Nathan had moved to the company headquarters, working directly with Edward on the ethical restructuring of Skylink, and he and Sarah were building something together, something real, deep, based on trust and mutual respect. One Saturday morning, Sarah was in her apartment when she received a call from Beatrice. "Sarah, I needed to thank you personally. For the first time in 23 years, I feel proud to work here. Things have really changed. You were part of that change too, Beatrice. Your courage was essential. The courage came from you, from seeing that one person can make a difference. After hanging up, Sarah looked out the window, watching New York wake up under the morning sun. She thought about everything that had happened, how a public humiliation had turned into the catalyst for a profound transformation. She thought about all the people who, like her, had been judged by appearance, treated as if they didn't matter, discarded by a cruel and unjust system. And she thought about how now, at least in one company, things were different. It wasn't perfect. There was still a lot of work to do, many minds to change, many cultures to transform, but it was a start. And sometimes, Sarah realized, a start was all you needed. The phone rang again. It was Nathan. "Good morning, honey. Breakfast?" Sarah smiled. "Sure, I'll meet you in 20 minutes. As she got ready, she looked in the mirror. The same woman who had been kicked off a plane looked back. But now there was something different in her eyes. It was no longer just determination. It was peace. The peace of someone who fought, won, and found, in the middle of it all, something precious she wasn't even looking for: love. And as she left the apartment on that sunny New York morning, Sarah Miller knew that regardless of how many cases she still had ahead, how many injustices she still needed to face, she would never be alone again. Because she had learned that the most powerful transformation doesn't just happen in companies or systems. It happens inside people, when they decide no longer to accept the unacceptable, when they choose dignity over conformity, when they opt to fight, even when it would be easier to stay silent. And on that day, as she walked through the busy streets toward the cafe where Nathan was waiting for her, Sarah smiled, because she finally understood that her true strength was never in the simplicity of her clothes or the discretion of her appearance. It was in the courage to be exactly who she was. And in that, no one could ever make her change. Dear listeners, we hope that Sarah and Nathan's story has touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of courage, justice, and love, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment struck you the most. Was it Sarah's initial humiliation, the romance that flourished amidst danger, or the fall of the corrupt and the company's transformation? Every day, we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, the challenges we face, and the strength we find when we decide to fight for what is right.